We have a majority SNP government in the Scottish Parliament. That is not a democratic place in the conventional sense. It is a dictatorship of one man sitting in Bute House who will do what not is what in Scotland's interest, but is what in his own or his party interest.
Born free as the wind blows, as free as the grass grows, born free to follow your heart.
Only Robert Mugabe can rule Scotland.
No, live free and beauty surrounds you. The world still astounds you each time you look at a star.
But how would an independent Scotland be different to Zimbabwe?
Stay free where no walls divide you. You're free as a roaring tide, so there's no need to hold.
Exactly what President Ahmadinejad wants.
Born free, and life is worth living, but only worth living 'cause you're born free.
We seem to have made such a bollocks of the United Kingdom.
I think that's a reasonable basis to start to be an independent country.
Ugstoff.
Power should be given to the Scottish Parliament and the SNP should do as they wish. We understand that.
Stay free when no walls divide you. You're free as a roaring tide, so there's no need to hold.
We have the opportunity, if we wish, simply to hand over powers to the Scottish Parliament.
Born free, and life is worth living, but only worth living 'cause you're born free.
Do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die.
Hello, and welcome to this episode 11 of the For All That podcast. We're joined today by the head of communications for Al Jazeera and former SNP candidate Osama Saeed. How are you doing, Osama? Thank you for coming on the podcast.
A pleasure. Good to talk to you guys.
And as ever, we're joined by Michael Greenwell and his menagerie of fertile and infertile animals. Michael, what's the state of your cat's womb today? I'm sure that our readers are desperate to find out.
She's calmed down, but we actually let her out for the first time because there's other cats in the area, and she's gone mad like 8 hours without coming back.
I like it. I feel that my life is structured around your animals in various states. Well, since we've got Osama on, and Osama's got an interesting perspective, I think, from living. Where exactly do you live, Osama, at the moment, when you're in your job?
I live in the capital city of Qatar, which is Doha, which is in the Arabian Peninsula.
So I imagine that as I look outside and see the English snow that has closed every shop and corner today, that you're looking out and surveying something rather more scorched.
Yeah, you could say that. Although the weather forecasts for what the week just passed and the week coming, the news reports say that the temperature has plummeted, and we've been getting about sort of 20, 22 degrees this week. So yeah, it's a tough life.
I can feel all the Glaswegians and Aberdonians throbbing with sympathy for your terrible situation.
Have you never subscribed to the idea that the weather in Scotland makes life interesting because you never know what's coming next?
No, it's pretty predictable, actually, Michael. I mean, last time I was back in Scotland was July, and I was a little bit homesick actually before coming, about 6 weeks out. I was really looking forward to it, and I got off the plane, Glasgow Airport. It was raining, and it rained for 11 days solid every single day. And as soon as I got off the plane, I just thought, I can't be having this anymore. It's the
absolute best. The absolute best I've ever heard about that is it's because God likes us and He wants to water us and make us grow.
Oh, that's lovely.
Though not
It's
very
good
well
spinning it.
reflected by the fact, that Scots are all quite short. I assume that the Dutch are the people that you must truly love, the Ents on the other side of the other side of the sea. But on that international theme, those of us who've been following this independence referendum debate will be seeing flashes and some signs of international interest and coverage of the various developments. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal. There was recently a long, actually, and quite in-depth study on Spanish television about the whole phenomenon. Osama, you have a perspective with an interest in independence, but you're based outside of the country and with a very increasingly prominent news organisation. What's your feeling about the level of international interest that we're seeing about the independence referendum so far?
I think it's definitely increasing, particularly after the Edinburgh Agreement. I mean, there was a spate of coverage around there, but I think the level of understanding of the Scottish case isn't there. I think when people look at other independent struggles and struggles for freedom, as we're seeing in the Middle East, people have an acute understanding of what's being said on the street, and that really hasn't come across from the Scottish perspective. Is why are the Scottish people suddenly far more interested in independence than they ever have been? What are the underlying reasons for that, and what does it mean? And I think actually there needs to be more engagement with the international audience, because that's going to be critical, I think, in the lead up to the vote itself. What is the international community going to make of it? What do the Americans make of it? The Chinese, and so on, and that kind of thing will matter. And it will particularly matter if other countries express any kind of negative perception towards it. I mean, obviously that will be exploited by the no camp. So it really is incumbent, and I don't know what is actually happening, what the Scottish government strategy is on reaching out to foreign governments, but I think there needs to be a heightened level of awareness of why Scots are seeking this and what it will mean to other countries as well.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's interesting. And Osama, on the point you made there about engagement with foreign governments, I mean, who do you envisage in doing that engagement firstly? Because obviously that's a kind of thing which you could imagine that many foreign governments whose relations at present are primarily with the UK government might not really be up for, firstly. And secondly, I suppose that there's a problem for the SNP too about, well, what promises it can make, what policies it can adopt. I mean, NATO is obviously a good example of where the SNP, I think, primarily for an external audience, an external governmental audience, changed its position on NATO rather than for this having any great clamour on the streets of Scotland. I wonder just what you think about that, about the kind of quality of that engagement.
Yeah, I mean, there is a structural disadvantage in the sense of that there aren't Scottish embassies around the world. So how do you do that? And you've also got a situation where I think you're not going to find the Scottish government travelling around the world extensively, like say someone like Hillary Clinton or even William Hague. They get to travel extensively. I think there will be an outcry if Scottish ministers were seen to be doing that. So I think they've got to be innovative. I mean, London's a good meeting point for many cultures. All the embassies are there. That's certainly a good starting point, and I'm sure the Scottish government are making efforts in that regard. But then using whatever opportunities they have at SDI or around the world, that they provide very good opportunities for dialogue through trade, and it will be tough, but it requires work. But I think it is work that needs to be put in.
Michael, I mean, you've presumably been following the various stories, at least the Anglophone, and I know you've got your Italian as well that you speak. What's your impression of the kind of reception of this whole controversy into the international press and media?
Well, there's some real problems of perception with it. Like, if I can go a few years back, when I was in South Korea, I was there for a year, and everyone you met, so where are you from? And okay, Scotland, and they go, oh, England, and this is not something people at home like to hear, but it's true. And I taught them quite well though. So what I would do in that situation is say, where are you from? And they'd look at me as if I was mad and say Korea, and I'd say, oh, Japan. and, that didn't go down that well, but they stopped doing it after that. But like, if you go to, I've been in Korea, I've been in Nepal, and if you look at there's this problem of perception. Some of it actually comes from maps. If you look at the world maps they have, it doesn't say Britain a lot of the time. It just says England, and they refer to the island of Britain as England. Also in China, you find that in Korea, you'd find that in Japan. So for a lot of people,
you find it in America too, don't you? You often see in sort of American dramas, you quite often see England being referenced for Britain.
yeah, and Scotland is part of England in this whole story. So I agree with Osama that we have to kind of get out there in the international arena and say that, you know, Scotland is not part of England. Like, so a way that I try to explain it when I'm abroad is that you should think of the United Kingdom as a kind of more dysfunctional version of the European Union, with separate states, separate nations with one state apparatus. But with the international media, like, there's another little thing where a few countries are running positive stories about it, but one of them's Press TV, which is the Iranian government sort of mouthpiece, and I think a lot of that should be taken with a pinch of salt. Another one of those is the Argentinian, and another one of those is Russia Today. Now, it doesn't take a genius to see that those three countries, to use the phrase that you used last week, all have a dog in this particular race. Do you think that, I'll ask Osama that, do you think that some, the media organizations generally have an agenda in some kind of way? And do you think that this is going to play out where some media organizations are going to come out in support of it to suit a particular agenda or not?
As far as medias go, I mean, they'll respond to what leaders are saying. I mean, I think by and large, with the exceptions actually you mentioned, outlets like Press TV obviously have a tighter editorial line from where they're controlled. But generally, it will come down to the Chinese leadership. You know, what will their view on it be? And I use the Chinese example because I know the Scottish government have had a lot of relations with China over the years, which they're continuing to cultivate. But it's interesting the view because I mean we get a lot of world leaders coming through my place of work, and I mean the overriding thing. I mean when I'm speaking with them and they find out I'm from Scotland, they do know there's something going on. I mean they don't know much about it. I mean the initial reaction is always, well, can you guys afford it? You know, and I don't know where that comes from, whether it's from a narrative from London or whether it's just a perception that, look, okay, you're a small country. But, you know, you don't need to get into too much of persuasion to just say, well, sometimes you're from a small country yourself. I mean, you know, let's do the math. And then they come around. I mean, they can see it and you know, they're amenable. But I'll come back to something that Andrew said as well. I mean, the whole NATO debate was interesting because in some quarters it was presented as, you know, this is appeasement towards, you know, powers within NATO. But it's interesting, actually, you know, speaking to a lot of NATO insiders, that they don't feel themselves having that sense of power amongst their member countries. I mean, the increasing thing, you know, amongst NATO people is trying to find a semblance of a role for themselves and to keep their funding coming from member states, which is one of the aspects I was confused about with when that debate was going on last autumn, that no one seemed to actually talk to NATO and find out the things that they asked, for example, to the EU. You know, everyone goes to the EU, will Scotland automatically get membership? It was just kind of assumed that NATO will give membership. I mean, I don't know why. I don't know what vested interest, you know, made sure that wasn't questioned. But then it didn't really get into, you know, what is this NATO? Is it really supportive? Is it going to be around in 5 or 10 years? And they are struggling around for a role. But outside of NATO, you know, where power is increasingly shifting, and even American interest is shifting from the Atlantic Alliance to the Pacific Alliance. I mean, it was very apparent, you know, looking at Hillary Clinton's visits, looking at Obama's first visit after his re-election, that he went to Southeast Asia, that the focus of the world has shifted. And I think for Scotland, you know, if there is this thought that we're going to just pin ourselves to this NATO alliance and that it means something, I think that's very lazy and backward way of looking at it, because